believe it or not everyone on the planet yet has a mature SBOM program. And so we're going to pivot, and we wanted to sort of use this to set up for this afternoon's discussion, is how do we make it easier and cheaper for folks to start down this path? And so we have a working group that's sort of the complement to all the people that are trying to build things, which is, what are the on-ramps into this discussion? How do we think about adoption? And this is, right, one of the real challenges, because it's not an engineering question, but it includes engineering. It's not a policy question, but it touches on policy. It's not just about economics. It touches on all these things. So this working group is one of the more lively working groups, and it's very ably led by Audra and Josh. So we're going to turn things over to them. You guys have 25 minutes, and that includes a little bit of time for questions.
All right, can you hear us?
Well, I can hear you.
Josh,
and you.
That's mine?
Fantastic. Yep, we can hear you, Audie.
And can you see my slides, or our slides?
Yes.
Okay. All right, this is the Ramones concert. Welcome, my name's Josh Corman. I'm a long time advocate of SBOM and public policy, and a lot of nonprofit stuff. Audra?
I'm Audra Hatch. I've worn a couple different hats and perspectives as we've made our way through this journey from NTIA to CISA.
Yes, both of us have a great deal of passion for healthcare as well. And not only is SBOM great for trust and transparency, SBOM is for lovers. In the last several months, I also married my co-chair. So she gets really embarrassed when I say that. I don't see the slides online, but I'd love to see if someone can work on that in parallel, because they are, we argue, the most beautiful slides. But can you see them? Okay, good. So I'm just going to drive. Welcome to On-Ramps and Adoption. Here we go. So we have some mission, vision, and goals. You want to kick off? All right, this one's me. We have a couple different roles. The dynamic range of participants is getting larger, from those who want to be brand new to this on day 5 of their journey, all the way through people that are on 5 years of this journey with NTIA, or 10 years or longer, depending on who you are, myself included. So we want to make sure that we can give you a starting point, no matter what your orientation is, what your role is. We want to give you signposts and be the welcome wagon and triage to the intermediate, advanced, and more role-specific working groups, several of which you've heard from today. And we've turned into a very different role and working group that may need to split into a new one, which is really want to identify and bridge any sort of gaps in adoption, things that prevent acceleration and movement, especially because the future is here already, just not evenly distributed. So one thing we like to ask, and perhaps you've been seeing me post these in the chat every half hour or so, is because of this widening range between people just starting their journey and very impatiently want to go faster for mutual benefit, we like to encourage bidirectional empathy in the face of this impedance mismatch. Yes, people can run fast and faster, but you might get to the finish line, but you won't win the race unless we can have proper handoffs. And there's quite a few really good building blocks. But as we try to see in our unified field theory a little later, if we don't meet people where they are and try to identify where they're stuck or what their gaps are, we aren't going to be able to go very fast, right? So you want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go together. And I think our group kind of sits in the middle of that tug of war between those that want to go faster and those that are just starting. So our request to newer people, more experienced people, is try to show some patience and empathy, both in the public discourse at this meeting and elsewhere when you are encountering people brand new to their journey. We also want to put a request to the new people, which is significant amount of work has gone into FAQs and roles and benefits documents and framing and at a glance and myth busting. So when we have put blood, sweat, and tears into consensus work, please be open to looking for it, reading it, and applying it, so we aren't always rehashing the same things over and over and over. We encounter most of the confusion as sincere beliefs or sincere but false beliefs. But the good news is we're here to help, and this group tends to be that welcome wagon. So we have some past, present, and future to share with you, just in case some of you feel like you're breakneck speed here, and this is the beginning of your journey. We're just going to show a couple greatest hits. Starting with, I think I showed this slide at the very first NTI meeting 5 years ago. just to be clear, so many points of confusion come out of what is an SBOM versus vulnerability management versus VEX. We didn't even have the term VEX yet, but SBOM is just the ingredients. It's just the green stuff. It's just tell us what's in it. Machine generated, machine readable. Of course, someone could map that to CVEs or the NIST National Vulnerability Database and generate a list of potentially associated vulnerabilities. But really, the actionable stuff comes into some sort of verification process in something like VEX, which you've heard about today. But tons of confusion comes around, like griping that the SB and SBOM is not a silver bullet. It's an information layer that enables and underscores significantly other use cases. We like to say almost every week in our working group, the William Gibson quote, "The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed." A lot of us pioneers in the SBOM world, we stole these principles from bill of materials in Toyota supply chains and Deming principles from the 40s that are like treasured from automotive, aviation, food supply, chemicals. And we're applying these proven supply chain principles into modern software development, specifically in the financial services sector. They've been using SBOMs to great effect since my first appearance into this, which was 2013, July 13, 2013, when Apache Struts 2 took out a ton of financial services. And I said, it's kind of open season on open source. The world just changed. And that was the first strike as far as my journey on why open source was everywhere and why we needed to be more transparent about where it lives. So I think the financial services sector is, pretty far along in this, and other sectors you heard from this morning are catching up quickly. So the point here is the bombs in the minefield, if you remember Minesweeper, maybe I'm dating myself, but the bombs exist whether we can see them or not. They can be triggered whether we are aware of them or not. This is not a roadmap to the attacker, it's a roadmap to the defender. There's other things in our myth-busting documents and the like, but these bombs are increasingly going off through indiscriminate attacks where foreknowledge is not a prerequisite, or they're just revealing themselves in greater volume, variety, and impact. So these things exist, whether we're aware of them or not, whether they're hidden behind an NDA or not. And the goal is to render the risks more transparent such that we can make informed risk acceptance, risk decisions, risk transfers, and the like. So we have a bunch of our greatest hits, including our canonical, we're on a supply chain, most of us in the middle. It was no accident we chose a bedside infusion pump going into hospitals, but you have a final goods assembled, put into plural operational environments. If there's a log4j, like we had Christmas before last, the ability to answer, am I affected, where am I affected, in seconds or minutes or hours is preferable to months. In fact, point of fact, one of the hospitals I work with the most from the Congressional Task Force, she had about 40% of her equipment could answer, am I affected, where am I affected, in her large hospital network within about 48 hours. But over a year later, she still has no answer because her vendors have no idea what's in their code. So these final goods assembled have a supply chain. Their supply chain has a supply chain. These are parts on parts, turtles all the way down, and eventually get to atomic individual parts for which there is no precursor. And a bad day anywhere can have broad-reaching impact everywhere. And we want to know, am I affected? Where am I affected? Audra?
So as part of our early NTIA journey, what we wanted to do was identify, excuse me, the different personas, and the canonical ones that emerged were they're producers of software, choosers of software, and operators of software. So we frame a lot of the things that we talk about with those personas and perspectives. And then we identified a number of benefits, including costs, reducing security risk, license risk, that are detailed in one of the documents that we'll have a slide on in a little bit, which is the use cases and roles and benefits. And a lot of these next ones are mostly for your review later, but for reference, for your awareness, that we did spend a lot of time understanding the use cases of SBOMs. We looked at the advantages of the depth of SBOMs, things like you mentioned Log4j. I think at the time we were publishing it, Urgent 11 happened. Yep. And if you looked at your first level of dependencies, you wouldn't find it. You had to look several layers down. So the importance of the depth emerged as part of that. If you are brand new, this is where we would ask that you start, is SBOM at a glance. And it gives a very high level summary of a lot of the documents that are published on NTIA. There's an SBOM FAQ.
You'll hear a little bit more about that.
This is the published version. We have a draft for review as well. We have a myths versus facts document that touches upon one of the myths that Josh said, like roadmap to the attacker. Are SBOMs useful without any complementary information?
Is it intellectual property?
Is it intellectual property, et cetera? So if you have any concerns about that, I'd recommend reading that. We have documents that cover the minimum elements and the excellent work done by Art Mannion and the framing group.
We also have one of the last things we published was we tried to capture the initial state of the art. So it's stunning to me that even years later, now that this has moved into CISA and now we're in our second SBOM-RAMA, several people hadn't really seen that quite a few people participating in this could generate at scale, at speed, this initial consensus column. In some cases, through hardship or legacy code bases or fear within the organization, some people can exceed the initial consensus. So they're demonstrated art of the possible in that plus column. And some people fall back to something that's the next best reasonable if they're not able to do the entire consensus. So this was not federal policy, but this was the consensus of the NTIA working groups. There's plenty of materials on that. We also had been maintaining and still do a large and growing list of SBOM adjacent topics. Sometimes it would be something like manufacturer usage description or MUD, DBOM, which is digital bill of materials for some of that sharing at machine speed, machine scale. And now we have a growing list of things like Salsa, Guac, SigStore, you name it. Most of those things we refer to, we encourage people to look at ntia.gov/SBOM, really hard to remember URL, but in the transition to the present era, the current epoch, CISA also has the CISA.gov/SBOM, which refers to some crowdsourced publications, but also some government publications, because we're now in a dual path where it is not appropriate to try to influence the implementation of federal policies. So CISA has a dual hat to both do implementation of the executive order and other mandates, but also convene these community-led, community-driven content things. So present day. What are we working on?
We have sort of become the hub for news, events, presentations, resources. We've been working on some industry and vertical specific primers. We have an SBOM calendar. So for all those meeting times that you can't remember for all the working groups, we have those on a calendar you can subscribe to, and we'll talk about these more in detail. We have an FAQ draft for review. Josh is going to cover crawl, walk, run and our perspectives there. And then I missed the last one on there, but we'll come back to it. So yep. We're using Asana and the help of the wonderful Brittany. Shout out to her. We're using Asana to start to track some of these things. It's also in our meeting minute notes. So this is just a list of the presentations that we've had, I think, since October of last year.
Yeah, so when Guac comes out, we get the people who wrote Guac to come give us a primer. So this kind of becomes the information hub and sharing for quite a few other working groups and triage. So we may not take on the project, but we might farm it out to one of the other working groups. And in the past, during the NTA phase, we did kind of play a role of working groups, and we've recently initiated that to get more coordination, deduplication, and faster line of sight. So these are just some of the other resources we work on. You don't have to get quizzed. We have these all trackable in Asana if that is your purview.
Just a quick view of the SBOM events calendar. We are currently in SBOM-RAMA. We would love to add things to this. So if you have an event or an upcoming SBOM related thing, please email. You can also bring it up if you're on our call, we will add it to this calendar based on information shared within our meetings as well.
So you mean I don't have to be in the dark all the time? I can get one-stop shopping for everything SBOM? Yeah. All right. Sorry about that, guys. So we do have a draft review that we're sending out today for a 2-week review period. We go through several different gates. Thank you to Duncan Sparrow for driving a lot of this. What we're doing is we're taking the previous well-vetted, excellent body of work from the NTIA SBOM FAQ. We've added 9 net new questions in support of documents like the OpenVex and VEX and CSAF and in support of things like the SBOM types, and also some of the rules and changes in the CISA era. Clearly, you can give us feedback on any items, including nominating net new question and answer pairs. We try to keep them atomic and clear, and this is the way you would do so. So we're going to distribute these slides, but we're going to give you 2 weeks from today before we try to nominate this to push to this very first CISA.gov FAQ version, branded and watermarked accordingly. So we believe these are pretty good, but please use these methods to get us feedback, and we will disseminate that through the CISA team later. So in this new era, it's not just about producers, choosers, and operators. We are feeling drawn and quartered a little bit in that we have a real big impetus mismatch between people just starting their journey because they saw the executive order or the FDA requirements, people that are trying to go faster at the walk stage or the run stage. So in NTIA, we were heavily focused on being able to produce SBOMs at scale in accordance with expected formats. we had their second most population through operators, and you heard from Jennings Askey today about the mix and the collaboration between those who produce software and those who operate software, but we were pretty light on choosers. So in the CISA phase 1 sprint, we decided we really need to create some materials that meet the choosers where they are. They play a brief but important role in asking for SBOMs to enable downstream benefits. So this is not meant for comprehension, and we're not ready to share it broadly because we have some material feedback from Sunil Yu and others that was pretty amazing. But the whole point here is in a 2-pager, and we had some great collaborators from our working group. We remind people that there's 3 real major personas, those who build software, those who choose it, and those who operate it. And you, as a chooser, either in procurement or acquisition in the private sector or the government, play a brief but important role to take these business goals, ask for an artifact that can support plural things, and ensure they have a fighting chance in the future and for the life of that. And when you can get an SBOM, most of it's self-service, both at the time of evaluation and procurement, but also in ongoing operations for things like CISA's great known exploited vulnerabilities list. But in lieu of those, we're trying to capture when people can't get an SBOM or an SBOM to their satisfaction, what kind of business goals could be offset in other ways. So Sunil Yu at Bank of America and other places, and many of our other participants pointed out they could either get enhanced discounts because the ongoing cost of ownership might go higher. They may be able to say, hey, we want you to strike any provisions preventing us from doing reverse engineering to self-service. We want you to make a legal attestation that there's no known exploited vulnerabilities at the time of sale, and commit to a service level that you'll tell us within 30 days or so many days if there are new KEVs. The whole point here is the easy button is provide the artifact. They're spit out by many of your common build tools. I think Amazon just announced some S3 stuff yesterday that's pretty robust and amazing. Git has it, Jenkins has it. Most of your tools can spit these out. So you can go the hard way and stay opaque, but maybe make offsetting commitments, or you could maybe provide the self-service that we're increasingly becoming our market requirement. But these are a couple of the questions and offsets that we tried to collect in the state of practice. This is not government policy. This is just what the community is doing when they do and don't get an SBOM, and hopefully trying to drive to a state where if you don't have an SBOM now, you'll have one later on. Audra.
Other ongoing efforts, we will continue on sprints on the FAQ. We'll continue documenting news and keeping the calendar up to date. I think our next focus is likely to be on, getting those industry-specific primers out if we can. We've been doing working group Socratic reviews as well, just to understand the broader landscape of all the working groups. And we can, if you would like to join our ONRAMPS and adoption group, I suspect that this will be the topic of conversation for the next couple of weeks of what is bubbling up, and we have a couple of future topics already identified.
Yeah, this is the nomination list that she was referring to. So we tried to crowdsource these. One that really bubbled to the forefront is in column 2, graduated expectation management. I gave a talk at RSA conference this year called The Opposite of Transparency, to try to get the root as to why are really intelligent people using kind of silly arguments to postpone this. And we really tried to peel back that onion and look at the underlying root causes. So we may start to look at some pragmatism about getting from current state of opacity to desired state of full transparency, and how we may have some tolerated opacity over time. So I'm going to give you a couple little previews from that talk, but you can watch it now. I think RSA gave you, it's public now as of last week. But back to that idea of the Minesweeper, back to the idea that SBOM is just column 1. It's accelerating the importance of things like VEX. But one of the things we really wanted to show is, and now this talk is also public, but there's a financial services group that had 10 people in 3 different buckets of cohorts that responded to the Log4j. And while many people were scratching their head when they saw the CSRB's report that no one was really able to use SBOMs in a meaningful way, here's some counter evidence from the private sector where there was really a cohort that had SBOMs pretty readily available in their organization and CI/CD pipelines. The second cohort only had CI/CD pipelines, and the third cohort had neither. And there were measurable material differences in how quickly they could identify and remove Log4j risk in their environments. And it's pretty stunning on the business impact and on the human impact. And I encourage you to watch this talk now published. But really what we said is, why are people so afraid of this transparency? And while there are hundreds of excuses or even sincere but false beliefs, maybe even a mix of misdis and malinformation, a lot of us know that, everybody poops. We all sin. We all had a lot of tech debt and legacy security debt. And really, some people are afraid to share potential accidental but license violations, potentially number 2, unfixable security issues where it would be cost prohibitive to remediate those known vulnerabilities, especially if they're material to the platform and the old code base. And many organizations aren't quite ready for that ongoing scrutiny and accountability. In some cases, they're very ready. Sunil, you mentioned before, go to jupiter1.com/SBOM. You'll see his full public SBOM the very first day he got there. And then there's other more nefarious and more perplexing root issues. But because these are very real concerns that a lot of producers of software have, and they don't want to get punched in the face as a reward for their transparency, we all know and believe one of our first principles in cybersecurity is that security through obscurity is no security at all. And a lot of this is kind of moot because, the Patch Act, which is basically the minimum cyber hygiene seatbelt laws for medical devices, passed into federal law at the end of last year. And as of March 29th, the FDA is enforcing machine-generated, machine-readable SBOMs for FDA pre-market approval, 510K submissions, et cetera. In fact, there's a little bit of a grace period where they won't outright tell you to go away through October 1st, but you do have to provide things in accordance with the law. So in light of that, a lot of the people that were making hand-wringing and fear and certainty and doubt and weren't quite sure what to do or how to do it, playtime's over for them. So at least we have a natural experiment in the healthcare industry. And because of that, one of the last parts of that talk, which I will not reprise here, is I kind of applied the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief to SBOM. And what we need to do is go from complete opacity, which isn't right or fair and is having increasing impact on public safety, human life, critical infrastructure. But we do have to be tempered and graduated in our expectations. And the real issue right now we're trying to eradicate probably in the first year is who doesn't have a clue what's in their software, because that should be something that should be driven out of the market. So giving people some time and maybe making it costly to not know what's in your own code. There's a growing number of tools that can help you even if you don't have your own source code. And maybe some people can know what's in their code and at least alert people during the next Log4j, but they're not willing to share, or maybe they'll share it, but under NDA. We think this is an anti-pattern. We think it will eventually go away, especially for some markets. But as you heard today, certain industries won't go away. It might be under NDA forever. And then other people are sharing them publicly. So we have the full spread. But the question I want to start posing is, what would opacity look like if we were going to deliberately add some opacity to our transparency? And some have argued for a single hop or double hop. And unfortunately, if you read our roles and benefits, 85% or more of the software dependency graph that could hurt you is more than 1 or 2 hops away. I think maybe a more tractable thing is not to NDA these things, but maybe we should tolerate some level of redaction. And this is just thoughts that we're thinking about doing for the next phase. But what could be practical graduated expectations over the next few years so that people can give you transparency in most places and allow that workflow, but maybe be able to say this house may contain some lead paint. Those are not going to last forever, as increasingly people are able to reverse engineer fingerprint, or worse, bad guys can attack you. And then they're starting to really provoke as people are adopting these, ingesting them. I think Schneider Electric is making 4,000 SBOMs and counting for industrial and OT and ICS. And there's a lot of working groups working on OT and ICS, cyber physical systems things. The scale with which this does in medical devices, it takes you from having maybe 100 CVEs associated with a medical device at the operating system level to maybe over 1,000. So this is really forcing a long overdue question of, should we really be prioritizing based on CVSS, or should it be the CISA.gov known exploited vulnerabilities, the exploit probability scoring system, SSVC, and things that have been pushed for a while? And what you're seeing is, if you have to create a VEX document for a whole bunch of potentially exploitable vulnerabilities, the order of operations is kind of revealing itself as almost an evolutionary necessity. So these are not conclusions, but discussion topics. And then lastly, as we round the corner for Q&A, as we try to herd the cats a little bit across the working groups, if you'll entertain for a moment the bottom of this graphic, it's much like our bedside infusion. This is a relay race, and ultimately now that the FDA requirements are here and hospitals are getting SBOMs and they need to ingest them and manage them into workflow, what we are finding is, while most of the legs of this relay race are pretty well vetted, described, and functioning for an individual stakeholder, there are breaks in the handoffs. So that circuit between the light switch and the light bulb, if there's a gap in that circuit, we are identifying in our group and rapidly iterating to make sure that we smooth the handoffs and sharings in that relay race, so that people who are getting these newly found SBOMs through the FDA are able to put them to good work in our nation's hospitals, where time-sensitive care could be the difference between life and death. So last minutes here, think of these as 3 vertical horizons. What we notice is organically, because we have a mix of crawl, walk, run, or beginners, intermediates, and advanced. If you put these orange boxes, the focal point of sharing has been very much on solving a 10-year problem of doing machine speed, machine scale for the entire internet. So these are good things that we have self-organizing groups. What we may start to ask, or we may even spin up, is a gap identification and Tiger team to make sure that before we solve 10-year problems, we also solve problems in the next time horizon so that we can have successful pilots beyond the successes of certain industries now in healthcare. And maybe those lessons learned can improve things. So we're asking each of the working groups to consider some near-term horizon things while they are also solving the midterm and long-term horizons. Audra?
To wrap up, our community ask, we're always looking for new participants, especially project leads. Focus on some procurement acquisition feedback for that primer that Josh mentioned. I think there was a question in the chat about it as well. We're looking to start to capture testimonials and SBOM success stories. We would love feedback on the SBOM FAQ draft for review. We've given 2 weeks for that. Please use the Google Doc or email us. And then again, just introductions to creative colleagues, new participants. And then we want to know how we can help you. What resources do you need? How can we improve what we already have? And then what are your future ideas and do they align with ours? Help us stratify and nominate new ideas for what we work on next.
And while we do meet on Tuesdays at noon Eastern, Kate would very much like us to change that date and time, and I think some of us would like to change it as well. But you can find us here. You can reach out to us through them. You can also track the SBOM calendar for changes. And we may, in fact, come to a point where we need to fork our group to do tactical Tiger teams to remove obstacles and gaps versus the coordinating center and on-ramps that we also provide for others. But it's a pretty lively group, and we really love to have you in there. If you go to one working group, I think this is usually the one that people start with, and you may end up in another. But thank you for your time today. Weren't these beautiful slides? I think she did a great job on these slides.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh and Audie. That was an incredible amount of content presented well and beautifully. We don't quite have time for questions because I do want to give both everyone in the room and everyone at home a little bit of break. If you're on the West Coast, it's lunchtime. If you're on the East Coast, go ahead and pour yourself a cocktail. You've earned it. And we will pick up after the break with 2 really important pieces. One of them is the collaborative interactive side of looking into what we as a community can do more. And you've already heard about the work that's going on. That's why we wanted to sort of present that. And it's a lot. There are a few of you that actually try to join all the working groups occasionally. We know that's not realistic. So I don't know if we're ready to say, hey, you know what, let's get a couple more hour-long meetings on the calendar. But we want to explore what else we can do to advance things, as Josh and Audie said, looking at different time horizons. So we'll be talking about that this afternoon, as well as giving you a chance to give feedback on the broader ecosystem of what needs to happen. And then also important is we're going to be hearing from parts of the government of what's happening. The community work, due to some laws in the United States, has said, hey, we can't collectively directly inform government regulation and government policy. There are strict rules. We have all sorts of policies that say if we want to get your feedback, we'll go through the Federal Register, we'll have a comment period. We have processes for that. But this is designed to be a little more agile, which means it's aimed at industry. So we wanted to make sure that we'll hear from the CISA team that's leading the self-attestation work, along with OMB, and we'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the medical device community. And then lastly, as the sun rises on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, we'll check in with our friends in Japan. So plenty of things more to come for those of you at home. Those of you here in Los Angeles, we've got lunch. So take a break, and the cliched advice is find someone that you've not met and introduce yourself. Maybe it's a customer, potential customer, maybe it's a potential supplier, but more importantly, it's helping to build the community. So thanks all. We'll be reconvening at 12:50 Pacific. which someone can do the math for me on what that means on the East Coast time. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you very soon.